Well, we've been in a slowdown in the economy since 2007 because the baby boomers peaked in spending. That's something I was predicting for 20 years. That's our 40-year and our demographic cycle, which is quite precise. And so what have we gotten? Quantitative easing to fill the gap. Well, quantitative easing has created the biggest financial asset bubble. You look at stocks today and think we were in the greatest economy getting ready to get way greater. And what we've really had is an unrecovery. We've been growing at 1.65% since the 2009 bottom, with massive stimulus, with very low inflation. We should have high inflation and high growth with this much stimulus. And it's because they're fighting a declining tide. And the cost of this, not allowing a recession, not allowing the bubbles and the debt to shake down like we normally do, we've got a monster financial asset bubble. Daniela, the most important number in the world right now is $520 trillion. That is, by the way, 6.2 times 84 trillion GDP in financial assets, stocks, real estate, bonds, that sort of stuff. Normally that would be 2 times GDP, maybe 2.5 in a normal boom.
Yeah.
Debts at 253 trillion. That's off the charts, over 3 times global GDP. But normally that'd be 1.5. So they use this financial asset bubble to offset the debt deleveraging and the debt bubble bursting. And now we have a bigger monster. And I am predicting within weeks or months, the central bank's just going to lose control over it. It's just going to burst. If you notice, and this is the reason for my prediction here that we're going to see a 40% plus crash in just the next few months. Every correction since the January 2018 top, that was when the real bubble started to top. And then we get all this seesaw backing up. We get a crash, we get a new high, and then every time we've got a crash to new lows, which means the market is trying to go down. We've peaked, and the next new low would project 2,100 on the S&P 500. That would be 45% from the recent top. That would mean the tech stocks would go down even more, maybe 50%. So I think the next crash, what people finally see is the central banks keep pumping up the economy against these downtrends, creating this monster bubble that keeps wanting to burst and deleverage along with the debt, and it's a losing battle. And when people say, don't print another, don't bother to print another 10 trillion this time. This thing's over. They lose control, and that's just going to be the first crash, and we'll end up by late 2022 or early 2023 back down 80 to 90% to basically erase this entire crazy bubble. Now remember, greatest bubble in history has occurred from 2009 into 2021 with the weakest recovery in history. Is the biggest disconnect between stocks and financial assets and the real economy. And guess which one wins? The financial assets and the stocks have to come down to reality. Hundreds of trillions, Daniela, at least 200 trillion minimum of this 520 is going to disappear in the next 2 to 3 years. And that does not cause a recession. That causes a depression.
When the only constant in life is change, you need to be ready. This is the Man-Made Survival Show.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jose Prado, Man-Made Survival, and I'm so glad that you're here with me today because I have a lot of information that we need to discuss, especially about this topic because it's going to affect everyone around the country. All right, but this time, instead of focusing so much on the citizen level, we're going to be talking about the stocks and how rich people are going to be affected by this. Because if you remember, if you've been here long enough, I made a video with a title that said, one day there's going to be an economic collapse so great that even rich people won't be able to get away from it. And the simple fact is going to be that since all of these assets and since all these bubbles are going to burst, then there's no way that there's no place that they're going to run away to. All right, so that is the reason why we have to look at this, because if they are affected to that extent, all right, if this crash is going to be so great that they're going to be affected, how much more are we going to be affected as the common people who do not have those type of assets, who doesn't have the type of liquidity? All right, so that is the reason why I want to talk about this time around when we're talking about the economy, because we have to see that all the pieces are coming together. And then again, we have another timeline. All right, as I open this video in this podcast, you listen to Harry Dent saying that, in the next 3 to 4 years, there's going to be this massive depression that is going to affect every American all throughout the country. So that is the reason why preparedness is so important, because when we see that those type of things are happening, we can do a lot of things that's going to really help us on our everyday life. All right, even if you don't own a stock, even if you don't own a company, or you don't own a house, or you don't have all these assets, you're still going to be affected, and you can still prepare for it, because if your employer becomes affected to the point that they have to close down, and they're not the only one, but everybody else around your town, then you can take the steps to ensure that even if the standard of living does come down, greatly, like it did during the during the Great Depression, you're still gonna be okay, because even as bad as it was back in those days, there was still a lot of people who were doing okay. All right, but it looks like this time, since the everything bubble is gonna burst, everyone is gonna be affected, different degrees, but you can take the steps necessary in order for you to prepare right now to be ready for that. And before I get into the articles and everything that I have to bring to you today, I want to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by you through the MemoSurvivalStore.com. I would really appreciate if you can go in there and check it out, because not only do we have everything that you're going to need for your preparedness, we also have the book that we're giving away for free, which is Preppers Secrete Cache. You can either go to the website www.preppersecretcache.com, and you can go in there, you can order the book, or you can go to the MemoSurvivalStore.com main page, and on the front you're going to see the link that is going to take you to the page where you can fill out the information, and we'll send the book to you right away. So I would really appreciate if you can do that for me, so you can get the book, share with your friends and family, so they can see the topics that they should be preparing for. And of course, the economy is number one. All right, and so why do I feel like we need to be talking about this subject? The reason that I really do believe that we have to talk about this is because to some point, the central banks are not going to be able to do what they're doing right now. The government is not going to be able to do what it's doing right now. All right, we have, with the Biden administration, we have new programs that it's just giving more money away, not only to the citizens, but to other countries, to other sectors, to other companies, stuff like that, where even more money is going to be printed. If you remember, when I made the economic podcast, the one before this one, the projections were out on how much money it was going to be spent by Biden's first term, and if he was reelected, by his second term. And on the first term, if I remember correctly, it was $45 trillion. So by 2024, there was going to be over $45 trillion spent. And on the second term, if he was there, it would be $78 trillion. So between that time, how much money can we spend before the creditors say, you know what, we're not going to be spending any money here in the United States anymore. There's no real prosperity here. If we continue to fund the United States government with all the reckless spending, then we're going to go under with it. All right? And they're going to try to flee somewhere else. But I really do believe that they won't be able to do it. All right, so the first headline that I have for you is about Biden's infrastructure plan. And what I really want you to focus on this is how much money is going to be spent and how long it's going to take for them to try to tax the rich people over the period of time to where they feel like they're going to recover some of it, okay? Because it's really easy to print infinite amount of money as opposed to try to tax everyone in your country to try to get that money back. And we're going to see that there's going to be a lot of, I guess you can say, a lot of gaps between those plans. All right, and I'm going to point those out because quite frankly, I have not heard anyone talk about it this way. So I'm hoping that you get a new perspective into this whole, money printing and everything else. All right, so this headline comes from Zero Hedge, and it says, "The moment America won the future, Biden unveils multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure taxation plan." All right, so the points are here, and the ones that I'm reading, I'm going to try to go through them really fast because, I don't want this to get very boring. So I'm going to, try to shoot through them very quickly. It says, motorizing 20,000 miles of highways, roads, and streets are in difficult shape right now. Expanding access to high-speed internet in rural areas. replacing the nation's lead pipes. Biden cited the crisis in Flint, Michigan, ramping up IRS enforcement of corporations, which he said would raise hundreds of billions of dollars, establishing a minimum tax of 21% on corporations' global earnings, which could bring in $1 trillion over a decade. All right, so I want to focus on that one really, really fast, because the Biden administration, all they have to do to get this infrastructure bill, I guess passed, or if they do it, all they have to do is sign, and then the central bank is going to give them the money, which is the Fed. And they're just going to give it to them. They're just going to print it out of thin air, right? They probably don't even print it anymore. They just, key in the computer how much more money is going to be given to the United States government. But as you see on that one point, it says establishing a minimum tax of 21% on corporations' global earnings, which could bring in $1 trillion over a decade. So what the Fed and the United States government can do just, in an hour, it would take a decade for corporations to pay that tax to pay it back, at least 1 trillion of it. All right, so if I'm not mistaken, this I don't have it on here, but this infrastructure bill, I think it was $2 trillion, something like that. It would take them over 20, 30 years to be able to pay it back if the corporate tax stayed the same and all those corporations didn't go to crap. All right. So that is very important that we pay attention to that, because it's going to matter later on in the podcast. Biden says some on Wall Street have estimated his plan could create 18 million jobs. While Biden's plan earlier didn't include any details beyond $80 billion on Amtrak, Biden said that the money would be used to create high-speed rails. Contracts will go to American companies, and products purchased will be made in America. Proposal first pushed by President Trump, creating 500,000 electric charging stations. So this is where the money is going to be spent. All right, it's 180 billion for research and development, 115 billion for roads and bridges, 85 billion for public transit, 80 billion for Amtrak and freight rail, 174 billion to encourage EVs via tax credits and other incentives to companies that make electric vehicle batteries in the U.S. instead of China. 42 billion for ports and airports, 100 billion for broadband, 111 billion for water infrastructure, 300 billion to promote advanced manufacturing, 400 billion spent on in-home care, 100 billion in programs to update and modernize the electric grid, 46 billion in Fed procurement programs for government agencies to buy fleets of electronic vehicles, 35 billion in R&D programs for cutting-edge new technologies, $50 billion in dedicated investment to improve infrastructure resilience, $16 billion program intended to help fossil fuel workers transition to new work, and then 10 billion for new civilian climate corps. Here's a quick rundown on how Biden plans to pay for all the massive tax hikes, some of which, like the corporate tax hikes, have already been reported. All right, so eliminate tax preferences for fossil fuel companies, raise the corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%, overall taxation of profits earned overseas by U.S. mega corporations, including raising minimum tax on global profits and eliminating several provisions that allow companies to reduce U.S. tax liability, ramp up enforcement of large companies and avoid taxes, prevent American companies from inversion to tax havens, eliminate loopholes that encourage offshoring, and deny expense deduction for companies that are offshoring jobs. All right, so the reason that I wanted to start the podcast with all of that, and hopefully that didn't take too long, is because you can see the massive amount of spending and how the corporations are going to be hit. All right, so this podcast is pretty much focus on how rich people are going to be affected by this and their corporations, which of course is going to affect us in the long run because we are hired by those corporations. So if those high-end jobs start disappearing because they're being taxed to the max, then the repercussions are going to be felt for decades, right? So that is the reason why I wanted to start with this. Not so much focus on the spending, right? Because we already know that it's really bad. We're at 32 trillion, even though they have not updated the official numbers yet. But we can add on to it because the stimulus packages were not added to them yet. So we're north of 32 trillion, and it's only 2021. How's it going to look like in 3 years when Biden goes for re-election? All right, that's the things that we have to look for. Now, the next headline is just something very quickly that I wanted to show you how they are going to try to really spend even more money. All right, but I'm just going to give you the headline, but then I added a note, or a thought that I had when I was doing the research for all of this. All right, this is also from SearHedge, and the headline says, Biden is looking for legal excuse to bail out upper middle class with student debt cancellation. And my notes here says he wanted to raise $50,000 in student loans per borrower. Why not borrow another 1.57 trillion and completely forgive student loan debt? That is a real question. I mean, I don't have any myself. I don't have any debt or any student loan debt or anything like that. So I don't really care whether or not he does this. But when we look at the whole picture on how much money is being spent, how much money is being borrowed without having any second thoughts, might as well add another $2 trillion towards this and liberate a lot of Americans in the meantime so they can have more time to prepare. Although not a lot of people are going to prepare, more than likely they would just get more debt. So the point of all of this is that we have to look at what is happening and really pay attention, right? So because of all this spending, all this money being spent, all this money being borrowed, all this money being distributed all throughout the world, it's really making the US dollar as this world reserve currency pretty much shake. As this next headline shows you from wolfstreet.com, it really paints the whole picture just on the headline. It says, US dollar status as dominant global reserve currency drops to 25-year low. And that is a very important headline because how much more is it going to go down? Now, in recent hours, in recent days, they have actually said that the US dollar has strengthened because, of all the money policies and the interest rates going up and stuff like that. But when you really look at the US dollar without all the programs and all the monetary easing and all the monetary policies and everything like that, it has actually weakened a great deal. That is the reason why Russia, China, and all these other countries are working very hard to have an alternative system so they don't have to depend on the US dollar anymore. That is the reason why we have to look at this, because I do believe once that happens, then the US dollar is going to crash horrendously. All right, so I have a video that I want to show you, right? And this video has two parts, but the way that I'm breaking it down, I'm just going to show you the first 3 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and read to you an article. All right, here's that video.
According to Foncreas, there are about 2,200 billionaires in the world. Over the past 3 years, their capital has grown by a whopping 70%, or $4.2 trillion. Now, their total wealth is now nearing $10.2 trillion. However, this expert alerts that these billionaires could potentially lose at least 90% of their fortunes in the next 5 to 10 years. Yet, not a single one of them is expecting this to happen or have been preparing for it. Additionally, due to climbing house prices, a lot of extra millionaires have emerged over the past decades. Now, estimates point that there are up to 46 million millionaires in the world. So, when the total global financial wealth is combined, the increase seen in their capital since 1990 has tripled from $80 trillion to $225 trillion. However, this staggering level of wealth accumulation is being supported by a very weak foundation of debt, since it was only possible to triple wealth by, at the same time, more than tripling global debt from $80 trillion in 1990 to $277 trillion today. In other words, the world hasn't created any net wealth. Quite the opposite. Wealth has just been inflated artificially through credit creation and money printing at the same scale. Even though total global debt and global personal wealth aren't the same thing, they can provide us a very good indication of how this extra wealth was created and has been created since 1990. And by now, you might have guessed that all of this money was created by just simply printing money to the extent of $200 trillion over the past 20 years. That's why this expert outlines that this is clearly the biggest wealth trap in history. Hannibal couldn't have done it better. Billionaires, millionaires, and ordinary investors have all been sucked into a honeypot, believing that they have real wealth based on sound foundations. What they don't realize is that they will, in the next few years, be ambushed by what to them is an invisible enemy.
All right, so that first part of the video was really, really important because as you heard, all right, this has been a lot of people who have benefited from increasing their wealth through debt. And even though it's kind of an illusion that it's going to give prosperity to everybody else, the ticking time bomb is still there. Because now the debt is a lot greater than the wealth combined of all the rich people in the world. All right, so I'm going to put back that the chart that you've seen on the video. And it reads, global financial wealth from 1990 to 2020 went from $80 trillion to $225 trillion. You know, that $225 trillion, that's a lot of money. Now, the second one is global debt. In the same time period, it went from $80 trillion to $277 trillion. That means that even if we were to take the entire global financial wealth and pay off the debt, we will still have a $52 trillion debt receipt that we will have to pay. And how are we going to do it when we already spent everything we had? We already sold all our property and everything like that to put towards this global debt. Where do we come up with the other 52 trillion? All right, so that's why it's really important that we pay attention to these details, because it doesn't really matter how much wealth there is in the world if the debt bubble is a lot greater than that is. All right, because as I have mentioned here in the past, all right, how much money are you willing to give towards the debt? Because per citizen is like $400,000 or something like that. Do you have $400,000 to put it towards the national debt so we can pay it off? I mean, how long would it take you to just get $400,000? And that means that you don't have no money to your name. No money for your mortgage, no money for your bills, no money for entertainment or going out with friends and family, or, on a date or anything like that. That means that you work exactly for that day to be paid off. How long would it take you to come up with $400,000? For very many Americans, it's impossible. And, I did in the past the example of how many people could Jeff Bezos pay, for that many people. If we were to take his entire wealth, how many people can he pay for? And it was something like 40,000 Americans. So even if we do take all the rich people's money and all the corporations and we try to distribute it to pay off the debt, we still wouldn't be able to do it. So that's why we have to pay attention to all of this and see how the rich people are going to be affected. And if they're going to be affected so greatly, how much more are we going to be affected? Now, of course, people are going to be worried about inflation, because if right now we can barely afford food, if we can barely afford our water bill, if we can barely afford, the payments that we have on credit cards and everything like that, if everything goes up, then how are we going to be living here in the United States? The standard of living is just going to collapse. All right, that is exactly why we prepare. Because if we prepare right now while everything is relatively normal as far as the finances go, we haven't had hyperinflation, then whatever it is that you would spend in the future and you can have it right now in your preparedness, then you're going to offset those those prices, that money, that deficit, you're going to be able to offset it, and you won't suffer as much as people who did not prepare. All right. That's why I do believe that we should all prepare as a community, not to be selfish and say, well, I prepare, you didn't, go away, but rather as bring everybody closer together and establish those type of systems that will help, Americans all throughout the country and really people all throughout the world to be able to have what they need and barter more freely and more, accurately and more stable. Because at first, when things, when crap hits the fan, and we have hyperinflation and money's no longer worth anything, and people need things, and we start to barter, we're not gonna know exactly how much, something is worth in the marketplace as opposed to what you actually need. Because let's say that you haven't ate in a week or in a month. All right. Oh no, let's just say in a week. If you have not eaten in a week and you come up to somebody and say, I'm willing to barter whatever you want for that piece of bread that you have, how much more valuable would that piece of bread be to you as opposed to whatever you can offer to the other person who is not in despair? All right. That is the reason why money is so important, because that establishes some way and means of trading as opposed to bartering. Right. But if we all come together as a community and we have established to how much something is, and gold and silver is the other way to do it, then that's how we're going to know how much something is worth and how much we're willing to give back and forth for it. Right. So $1 gives you a piece of gum. We can do the same thing with gold and silver. All right. But that is going to be something in the future. That is the reason why you need to stock up on gold and silver right now while it's still available, because once everyone, including the rich people, become more poor, everybody's going to want to have that means of exchange, which is going to be gold and silver, and then it's going to be completely wiped out of the world. And I this is going off memory. I remember listening to Kit Kat News, and they were saying something like there's only like 1 or 2 ounces of gold for everyone around the world. Like, if you were to get all the gold and silver that has been mined already, that is not in the ground, that's out in circulation, if you were to take all of that, it would only be enough for everyone around the world to only have 1 or 2 ounces, something like that. I'm going off memory. So if you're accumulating it right now, how much, how rich will you be in the future once the system implodes? Because it's going to implode. All right, as I'm going to be showing you, it's going to be more clear and clear to you how it's going to be happening. All right, so the next headline that I have for you is really important because Americans are starting to look at this. And really, even though they did the polling on the American people, I'm pretty sure that's how people in Europe feel, people in China feel, in Russia, in Africa, in South America, especially the people who know how finances work and how the economy works, and they have the assets to be able to move around works. They're the ones who are going to be more worried about all of this. Right? But this article, what it's doing, it's going to the citizen level, to the everyday people, and saying, how worried are you about inflation? All right, and this is what they said. The article's headline is 77% of Americans are worried about soaring inflation. Much of the inflation concerns were based on younger respondents. About 52% of respondents aged 18 to 24 were very concerned about inflation. 50% of the 25 to 34 age respondents were very concerned, and 48% of 35 to 54% were also very concerned. Surprisingly, baby boomers aged 65 plus were only at 37% worried. Meanwhile, Cleveland Fed President Charles Evans said some increase in inflation would be welcome. Too low inflation is no good, he added. But for the millions of working poor Americans still collecting pandemic insurance checks, soaring prices have been much of a nuisance. Quote, naturally, people who have had their hours or pay reduced as a result of the pandemic are the most sensitive to the idea of inflation and what it means for the general cost of living. If it's difficult to make ends meet now, imagine how difficult it could be once inflation sinks in, said Civic Science. And the reason that poll is very important is because that's how everyday people feel. They are seeing the inflation at the grocery store. They are seeing the inflation in their power bill. They're seeing all these things go up, especially with the Biden administration and all the policies they're trying to do. Because, you know, for the Green New Deal or whatever it is that they're calling it now, if they're going to be taxing even more the power companies, you know, to try to get them to move from coal or whatever it is that they burn into renewable energy, who do you think is going to pay off the extra money that they're being taxed? You and me. So that is going to be more difficult for us, for you and me, to pay our bills as it was before the Biden administration tries to implement any of this. All right. How about food prices? With the weather, with, you know, China buying everything that they can, with farmers failing, with bankruptcies and everything else that we've seen, how much more will food have to go up for people to start noticing even more and start becoming angry about it? Because there has been in the past where, well, I don't think in the United States, but, you know, in African countries and other places who do suffer food insecurity on a regular basis, they become angry when there's no food available because, you know, you feel that desperation. So now that all of that is coming to the United States and it's here now, how much worse is it going to be if we start having hyperinflation? All right, so the next video that I have for you is really going to explain how central banks are printing the money to stop crisis. But eventually it's going to get to the point where it doesn't really matter how much money they print. It's going to collapse either way. And that is the reason why you have to prepare. All right, so here's that video.
So Juan, just getting back to the central bank. So you're saying the Fed can't even, with the correction coming, the Fed can't even save it here with their liquidity pumping?
Okay. What did they just do? We had the COVID crisis, perfect trigger, by the way, because it's hit a death blow to the economy. We've recovered V-shaped 80% back, but we can't get back to 100 because there's a lot of industries that simply can't. Travel, entertainment, large parts of retail, on and on and on. So they printed in 8 months as much as they did in the entire 80-month QE cycle before it. So they're having to print exponentially more to stop each crisis. And guess what? We're already, the consumer spending, and I've been predicting this, already weakening again. And basically people say, well, wait a minute, you just printed so much. I mean, the market did race to new highs on that, but the market's way ahead of itself and the economy is not following it. So when people see it doesn't matter how much they print anymore, they're going to have to print $10 trillion next time. And people are just going to say, I'm sorry. The investors are going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not betting on this double down, double down, double down, double down theory. Because you know what happens when you keep doubling down. I don't care how many times you win, you end up at zero.
All right. So again, really, really important. Okay. Because now it doesn't really matter how much money they're trying to print to try to keep the crisis from happening. It's going to collapse. It's going to go to zero, like he said. Okay. And I showed you in the past how central banks, when they were having their meetings, they're saying they were encouraging countries, they were encouraging governments to print even more money so the collapse won't happen right now. So they're trying to offset it off into the future to where they can actually control whatever it is that they're trying to do. Because they're going to be forced to look for a different world reserve currency. The United States dollar is going to collapse completely. We're going to have hyperinflation. Right. So the debasement of the monetary, or the debasement of the dollar, is going to be something that could happen in the next several years. So again, we have another timeline for it. Okay. So what can you do right now in order for you to prepare? You can stock up on gold and silver. All right. But you can also prepare in all the other ones that I've talked about here in the past that is going to help you have a better standard of living. Okay. And I give you the list and everything like that. But really what you have to focus is on the supply chain, because that supply chain is going to be the most important part of your preparedness. And if you don't have those four taken care of to the max, then really it's not going to matter all the other ones, because you will eventually be in a point where you will want to have the supply chain back on track. All right. So that is the reason why we have to make sure that we're prepared. And we are masters in those four categories that I give you, which is food, water, medicine, and energy. Okay, and it has to be all types of energy that you can create at home. Even if you do buy solar panels, you have to understand that eventually that's going to break. And if we're in a hyperinflation environment, you won't be able to to get that energy back. So you have to make sure that you look at energy and all the aspects around it that is going to affect the food, that's going to affect the water, that's going to affect the medicine, right? Because if you're going to rely solely on your solar power, what are you going to do once that breaks down? If it breaks down, or there's a shootout in your house or in your property, and bullets start flying everywhere, and it just so happens that your battery station gets hit and all of that gets destroyed. Or what if, during the night somebody saw your solar panels and they took them with them? You have to make sure that you have redundancies around those 4 categories of the supply chain, and you can either replace them or you can have an alternative to it. Okay, for example, food. It's really easy. Not only do you have to have stocked up food from the grocery stores, but also the 25-year shelf life stuff. And not only do you need that, but you also need to have seeds. And not only seeds, but also your farm animals and everything like that. So those are the different type of redundancies that you have in food, because there's people who only push the storable food, just stock up, but there's no plan for replenishing. All right, and I have seen and read in other places where they say, well, I don't really want to have a garden. But if you're in the middle of crash, I see the fan on a scenario that's going to last for several years, do you really think that you're going to have the choice whether or not you need a garden? No, not at all. All right, so that is the reason why you have to make sure that you take care of that right now. The same thing with water. You not only do you need surface water, you can have a well, you can have a pond, and you can have a rain catchment system. You can have your filters. You can have bottles of water stocked up at home. That is going to be your redundancies on water, not just the one. All right, and remember, if you're going to collect rainwater, it has to be legal in your state. All right, that's the only, disclaimer that I have to remind you of. With medicine is going to be more tricky, because you can make a mistake on how much to give, or whether or not you understand natural medicine. You can actually kill somebody. You can kill yourself, you can kill somebody in your alliance. So you have to make sure that you study it and you know exactly 100% what you're doing. All right, and remember, I don't promote you falling away from the modern medicine, because modern medicine works wonders. You may have your beef about the pharmaceuticals and stuff like that, and I agree to most of it, but it should not replace modern medicine, because modern medicine has all these years of research and everything that they've done. There's specialists, there's doctors and everything like that who understand it very, very well. When you switch to natural medicine, it has to be something that is in an emergency, where we're talking about a scenario where doctors are no longer available because they're at home trying to take care of their family, all right, and stuff like that. So that's the reason why you have to prepare. So that is the main focus you have to have, because once the value of the currency plummets to the point that we have hyperinflation, we're going to see that in the United States for several years. I really do think more than a decade. All right, so the next video that I have for you is going to show you how bad it could get, that the number of billionaires around the world is going to decrease to a number that will really blow your mind. All right, here's that video.
In his analysis, von Greyers points out that one of the first steps to this tortuous downfall is the total debasement of the currency, whether it is dollars, euros, pounds, or yen. Of course, they can't all go down simultaneously against each other, but they will all collapse in real terms, which means in terms measured by the only form of wealth that survived history, gold. Evidently, the path until this point won't be linear. As currencies go down, we will witness hyperinflation first. Asset prices can even be boosted in nominal terms, but definitely not in real terms. On top of that, there will be an implosive burst of both the debt bubble and the asset bubbles in stocks, bonds, and property. That is why we will see the biggest wealth destruction in history, he proclaims. In 5 to 10 years' time, As opposed to the 2,200 billionaires we have now, the world might have as little as 200. That doesn't mean that all of these companies will disappear, but their earnings will be substantially lower as PEs will collapse. Again, as I often stress, the best lessons we learn are from history. Everyone thinks, oh, it's different today, but I promise it isn't. Almost everything we experience today has happened before, he continues. All evidence is pointing to the occurrence of a harsh market correction. So major fortunes are likely to be wiped out in the next chapters of the collapse.
So I really hope that I had done a good job explaining this, because, rich people will try to fly somewhere to the next safe haven, and they're going to try to keep their millions or their billions, whatever it is. But when you can see a reduction in billionaires from 2,200 billionaires to only 200, that means that there was a great decrease, like an 80% decrease, maybe more, just going off the top of my head. That's how bad the financial system can collapse. And it doesn't really matter where they're going to try to flee to. If they cannot find a haven, they're going to find themselves in a very difficult time wherever it is that they are. That's why I do believe that that's the reason why China has now backed up their yuan with oil, with bullets, and with gold, because they have also been collecting a lot of gold, and they are creating their currency to become a cryptocurrency, which is going to give the appeal to everyone, knowing that everything will be digitized with their currency. So I really do believe it's just a matter of time. We don't know when, but the timelines are there, right? Some people are saying the next 5 to 10 years. Some people are saying sooner. Harry Dent is saying that, by June, the stock market is going to collapse. And the reason that is really, really important, even if you don't own any stocks or anything like that, is because of these facts from the stock market. The stock market around the world is only worth $95 trillion, with the New York Stock Exchange valued at $25 trillion. So even if we took the entire stock exchange from New York to pay off our debt, that would only cover $25 trillion of the 32 that we have at this time right now. When the collapse comes, let's just say, in the next 5 years, if it collapses in June, those 25 trillion of liquidity is going to be gone. And Harry Dent is he's saying there's going to be like a 60 to 90% decline in the stock market here in the United States alone. So if we thought that we were going to have money out of the stock market to be able to pay for this debt or whatever, goods and services you need, it's going to be gone. More than likely, it's going to be gone by June. So that is the reason we have to prepare now. That's why the sense of urgency is now, because not only do we have a timeline for our economy to collapse here in the next few months through years, but also to have war with Russia in the next few weeks and possibly hours, because something that I want to read to you real quick, because this I guess you can say this development is increasing every single day very, very quickly. And now this has come out. Russia deploys nukes. And there's pictures of Russia loading nukes into the transport, and they're putting it near the border with Ukraine. And the reason that they're using those is because they want to, fight off NATO, or at least, intimidate NATO enough to say, you have to make sure that the move you make, if you try to invade us, is going to be the one that you actually want to do, because we're going to blow the crap out of you. And not only that, they also had increased 100,000 soldiers into their border. That's a lot of people. And that means that it's serious enough for them to have all this equipment, to have all these soldiers, and to have these nukes deployed there. All right, so that's another timeline that you have. And it seems like everything that we have been talking about is going to be hidden by 2025. And very oddly, if you remember, the Deagle report says that in the United States population is going to go from the 330 something that we have right now to only 100 million. 320 million citizens in the United States to 100 million. And that's a great decrease. Are you going to be among the living or the dead? If you're among the living, you better be prepared, because that means that you're going to be able to soften up the crisis. You're going to be able to, to withstand it a lot better. That is the reason why preparedness is so important. So I really hope that you have understand this information. I hope I did a good job at explaining it to you. And that if you have not prepared, I hope you start preparing with urgency. Preparedness can no longer be a hobby that you do every once in a while, that you only watch the videos for entertainment, that you only watch these slides of pictures of the woods and everything like that just for fun. It has to become a way of life, especially right now that we're going into the spring. Right now you have the opportunity to put foot in the ground. If you're not going to eat it, at least to practice how to grow your own crops. All right, so I really do hope that you have taken all the steps necessary in order for you to be better off in the future. All right, because whatever it is that you're going to be during this economic collapse, during this war, is going to be where you're going to make your last stand, even if you do have a bug allocation. All right, so make sure you have everything in place right now for that to happen. All right, on the next podcast, we're going to be talking about something really important that I've come across. And I really do think that if this happens, it's another timeline that is going to be within the next 10 years. So we have to prepare for that as well. All right, so I really do appreciate that you stay all the way to the end. Please share this information with your friends and family all throughout your social media. Please visit the store, ManManSurvivalStore.com, and make a purchase. That will really help us to continue this podcast, to be able to bring this to you, and to spread this word out. So please share this information with your friends and family. Like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And also I want to remind you, my name is Jose Prado, always ready.
NASA scientists predict a giant asteroid will enter Earth's atmosphere in 2029. Could this be the Revelation 8 wormwood prophecy? My guest has important information, natural and supernatural, to explain what might be a massive cover-up of end-time proportions. Interested?
The Man-Made Survival Show.